Hi everyone, it's Laura. Welcome back. So, as we've now seen, there are many different paths and definitions for the term yoga. So, from a superficial perspective, this may appear quite confusing and contradictory. However, through disciplined awareness, one comes to find that each path is laid out for different mindsets and constitutions. So, depending on where our mind is, we may require different methods for learning or different paths of yoga. So, this understanding can then also be applied to different religions and spiritual practices around the world. And it's when we can ultimately come to see this underlying unity in diversity that we can begin to work together rather than against each other. So, it is for this reason that the great Vedic scholars throughout history, such as Vedavyasa, Adi Shankaracharya, and Patanjali, are credited with having written texts on seemingly opposing schools of thought. They were able to see the truth and realize that it's only consciousness through their experiences. And this is the one truth expounded upon in the Vedas as well as the Upanishads. And to a certain extent, you could say that this is the underlying truth of all major religions. So, having realized this, Patanjali did something rather innovative for the times. He developed a eight-limbed system, a step-by-step guide, if you will, to bring us closer to this realization or self-realization. This is realization then of our higher nature. So the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are believed to have been composed between 200 BCE, that's before Common Era, and 200 CE or Common Era. And they are the primary text on Raja and Ashtanga Yoga. The premise, as we've now established, is experience. So, just as one cannot understand the sweet taste of honey without having tried it, one must practice and experience the different states of yoga in order to fully comprehend them. So, like most ancient Indian philosophers, little is unfortunately known about sage Patanjali, but we can say that from a mythological perspective, Patanjali is considered an incarnation of Lord Vishnu, the preserver, through his vehicle, the divine serpent Adishesha or Sheshanaga. As such, he is usually depicted half human and half serpent. So, as a resting place for Lord Vishnu, Sheshanaga personifies the perfect balance between effort and ease in asana. So, to hold the massive weight of Vishnu, he must be strong and then he also must be comfortable as he's a bed and a resting place. So, he is therefore relaxed, comfortable, and sturdy, the epitome of asana. The word sutra then implies a short verse and can be translated to mean thread. So, as knowledge was initially transmitted orally, these short verses were utilized for practical memorization purposes. It's easier to remember shorter little bits. And they're meant to spark an understanding of their meaning as conveyed by a teacher. So, as such, a commentary is generally attached to the Yoga Sutras for individual reading and understanding. So, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras consist of 196 short verses divided into 4 chapters or padas. Chapter 1 is titled Samadhi Pada, and Samadhi we can translate to mean complete meditative absorption. In this chapter, Patanjali tells us what yoga is and why we should practice it. He very intelligently kicks off his thesis by enticing the reader with the experiential benefits of the practice of yoga. Because up next, in Sadhana Pada, the chapter on practice, he tells us we're going to have to put in some work. So in this chapter, Patanjali outlines the first 5 steps of his 8-step system to a state of yoga, or Ashtanga yoga. And these limbs or steps gradually guide the practitioner through the internal and external purification processes in order to connect with the higher self. So then in chapter 3, Vibhuti Pada, we get the goods. When you come to refine the mind enough, which we first do through the body in Hatha Yoga, and then through the mind in Ashtanga or Raja Yoga, the yoga of Patanjali, you start to see it like it is. You finally see the world clearly, untainted by Maya or illusion. And as you do, you start to maybe understand how things work. And as knowledge is ultimately power, certain powers arise. So the term vibhuti here implies psychic powers or accomplishments. In this pada, Patanjali expounds on the final 3 and more internal limbs of Ashtanga yoga, and he shares knowledge on the powers that can be attained through their practice. So while these powers may outwardly appear maybe impossible or mythological, upon deeper consideration, they're really not so far-fetched as they may seem. Much like, say, scientists study the atom, when you really concentrate on something long enough with one pointed attention, you'll come to understand its nature. And this is the premise for vibhuti, or psychic abilities. So it is, however, warned that these powers are nothing more than further obstacles on the path to liberation and should ultimately be avoided. So then we come to our last chapter, Cavalia Pada, and Patanjali here gets deep. Cavalia, we can say, means ultimate liberation from duality. So to clarify, as this is often misunderstood, samadhi is not liberation. It's just a foreshadowing, if you will, a glimpse of ultimate liberation. Final liberation requires a merging into consciousness. It requires giving up this ego existence, this sense of I, and giving up samsara, our cycle of life, birth, and death. Samadhi initially wakes us up to this, but true liberation in its deepest sense is ultimately beyond our understanding at this plane. So, in this chapter, Patanjali considers yoga from a more cosmic and philosophical viewpoint. He discusses the nature of individuality, of karma, our underlying unity, and how we can ultimately then be liberated from duality, or Cavalia. So, as you can see, the Yoga Sutras really provide us not only with this systematic way of reaching a state of yoga and ultimately liberation, but they also provide very somewhat basic and timeless principles for examining the mind and its activities. And as yoga is the psychology of Indian philosophy, they ultimately provide us with a way to become our own therapists. And Patanjali shows us how to, classify our thoughts, categorize them, and observe them. he then goes on to tell us how to get rid of them, how to stop them. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, yoga is the cessation of the thought waves of the mind. And this will then ultimately lead to freedom and bliss. And who doesn't want that, right? So it's a pretty useful tool book. And as such, it's considered the principal book on yoga these days. So we've now been introduced to the basic principles of Indian philosophy and thought. We've considered the groundwork from which Patanjali's sutras were composed, and now have an idea on their structure. So we'll continue to explore the sutras, their meanings and significances, and most importantly, we will really consider how we can practically apply them into our modern lives.